Hey guys, Will here, and today we're going to talk about how you can 10 times your work output by using dopamine. Now, this can apply to anything in life. If you need to get some deep work done and you're having a hard time getting into that deep work stage, then this will help you out. If you need to study for a test, this will help you out. This is my thought process and the tools I have used to scale a business to six figures at 17 years old, train for an Ironman, be a musician, and keep straight A's and study throughout my entire academic career. So, when we're talking about dopamine, the first thing we need to understand is reward prediction and the reward itself. So, when we're talking about reward prediction, think about when you were a little kid and it was the night before Christmas and you were up all night thinking about the presents that you were going to be getting the next day. That is reward prediction. That is your brain being happy because you are anticipating a reward that's going to happen in the future. And that's also a tool that we can use to increase our work output. So the whole thing with reward prediction is that dopamine will increase as we are anticipating a reward in the future. Now, the other part to this is the reward itself. This is also important because if there's no reward, then there's no reward prediction, and then there's no increase in dopamine that we can use to increase our work output. Also, when we have a reward associated with the work that we do, we associate in our brains the work with the reward, and that will make it easier and more fun to actually get this work done. So, the next vital part of this is that motivation is actually the thing that dopamine induces, all right? Dopamine does not equal happiness, as a lot of people think. A lot of people hear dopamine and they think, oh, that's the happy chemical. And while it does make you feel good, I think a lot of people mistake it with serotonin, which is what makes you feel blissful or like you're on the clouds, whatever. But dopamine is actually what leads to motivation. So think about a caveman version of you, all right? You're having to scavenge for food every day. You have to go find water every day in order to live. So if you have no motivation to do this, you're not going to be able to survive. And this is what dopamine really does. When we get down to it, dopamine is what motivates us to do stuff. Interestingly enough, there was a rat study where they had a lever press that would release food, like a lot of rat studies, and they took out the actual chemical part in their brain in some of these rats that would release dopamine. So half of the rats have dopamine, half of them don't. And the thing that they found was that the rats who had dopamine would move over to press the lever to get the food, and the rats who were not able to produce dopamine in their brain actually would not move even a couple of inches to press the lever to get the food. So now that we know that dopamine is actually what drives motivation, we have to understand there's only a finite amount of dopamine that our brain can produce. And if we're using this dopamine to motivate us to do the wrong things, then we're not going to get anything done and we're not going to get any work done. So, a quote that I found is that the difference between success and burnout is not work ethic, but actually just dopamine control. So, now we got to understand how dopamine actually works in our brain. So, this is a diagram of dopamine with its peaks and its baselines. So, as we're going through the day, we are around this baseline all the time, but we're actually modulating up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. Some of these peaks are bigger, some of these peaks are smaller, but that's actually how it works throughout the entire day. Now, if we're able to control these peaks and these releases of dopamine, and if we're able to use this peak in the time that we want to do work, then the work is just going to get a heck of a lot easier. And then also the crash is going to get smaller. So you're going to work. It's going to be long peak of dopamine. You're going to come down, barely crash, and then return to baseline. All right. We have to understand that dopamine spikes when we're doing things that our brain perceives as fun or as something that's worth doing. We also have to understand that after that fun has worn off, we get into this dip, all right? And that's what some people consider a crash after doing something fun. So, if you've ever been out on a really fun night or been to a concert and then you're driving home and you're all of a sudden really sad, that's because you peaked and now you're in the dip and you're going to be sad until you return to baseline. Once we're able to apply this peak area to the work that we're doing, that work is going to get a hell of a lot easier and we're going to enjoy doing that work a lot more. And that's essential to not burning out while doing work. The hard thing in this day and age is that with all this media that we are consuming and all of the candy and processed foods, this baseline is actually just going to get higher and higher. And that's going to make it harder for you to actually feel happy because the peak going to go the same place and then you're actually only going to feel happy here rather than this entire area. So the farther down that we can bring this baseline, the easier the work is going to become and the more enjoyable as well. Now that we understand how this dopamine works, we have to eliminate all of the bullshit dopamine that we get today. This can come from a lot of things: fast food, sweets, drugs, all of this horrible. This is all stuff that makes you happy and increases that dopamine, gives you a spike in dopamine with no effort. That is what you have to avoid. The stuff that spikes dopamine with no effort, horrible. Here's a quote: "Every time you get dopamine without effort, your brain learns to expect reward without action." And that's the formula for burnout. So people talk about burnout a lot. Burnout isn't real if you're able to control dopamine, and burnout isn't real if you're able to control your mind. Something I like to say is that short form content and stuff like this is mental chewing gum, all right? You're able to just consume and consume forever without doing anything that actually matters in life. When you're watching this short form content, your brain actually thinks that you're doing something when you're really doing nothing, and that's just depleting the amount of dopamine that you have in reserve to do the work. The more of these activities that you indulge in that don't require any effort, the harder it's going to be to feel accomplished from doing actual work. And therefore, you're not going to want to do that work as much. So if you can cut out all the bullshit, then it's going to be so much easier to just get stuff done. All right, next, we're going to look at something you can replace it with and what I've invented, which is the dopamine ladder. All right, so you can replace this stuff with exercise. So what a lot of people I know have done is every time they're craving one of the drugs or something they're addicted to, they'll go for a run or they'll go do exercise. And that's going to lead to a more steady dopamine curve and a steady dopamine peak throughout the day rather than just this fast peak. All right. Healthy food, great. Eliminate all the sweets and fast food. Replace it with healthy food. Go eat some vegetables. Go eat some meat. Also, cold exposure. There's a lot of controversy around cold exposure, but I don't know a single person who doesn't like cold exposure who's also accomplished some shit with their life. So I'd say just do it. And hard stuff in general, the more hard stuff that you do, the easier the hard stuff is going to become. So the easier all of the work and effort, studying, building a business, whatever you're applying this to, the easier it's going to be if you just do hard stuff. So if we look at exercise, healthy food, good things when it comes to dopamine, things that require effort, this is what your dopamine is actually going to look like. So instead of having a fast peak like you would, so this is you watching TikTok, fast peak, and then big crash, long crash, all right? And that's over the span of hours or even less than an hour, even a couple of minutes. But if you replace that with exercise, the dopamine's going to look like this, all right? You're going to have a bigger, longer peak. It's going to keep on going. You're going to feel good for a longer time. And then you're just going to get a less amount of that crash, and you're going to feel better in general. Here, we're looking at the dopamine ladder. The things at the bottom are the hard things to do, all right? That's like cold exposure, studying, exercise, all right? Hard to do, but they're going to lead to that gradual increase and less of a crash afterwards. Next up, we got caffeine, music, stuff like that. It increases dopamine without a ton of effort, but it can be useful if you apply it in the right situations. Then we got video games. This should be way higher. This should be up here with all the bullshit. It just increases dopamine, no effort. Then we got alcohol, the geek bar, porn. this is candy. And all of that, you put in no effort, you get a massive spike, and it's not going to help you get your work done. So now we want to look at how we can actually apply this, all right? So, how we apply this is through cues, work, and then the reward for the work. Having a cue is something that people don't really talk about a lot. I think it's extremely important to get your brain in the right mindset to do work. So, I know people, and what I try and do personally is I wake up and that's my cue. I beeline it to my computer and start getting shit done. And that cue puts my brain in the right mental state to get work done. But it can really be anything. It could be a specific type of music you listen to. It could be a specific action like opening a door 3 times. But when you have a cue that tells your brain, okay, it's time to work, then it's going to make the work a heck of a lot easier. Next up is the work itself. The work itself should really be providing dopamine, but you can also use other things to increase your dopamine and only use them while you're working. So, caffeine, I would recommend waiting a little bit, waiting about 30 minutes of work. So, doing 30 minutes of work, then drinking a cup of coffee. Then you're going to associate that work with the positive effects that caffeine has, and you're going to associate that with the work that you've done. Another thing that a lot of degenerates can do, I don't know if I would recommend it because it's not sustainable over the long term, is things like supplements like L-theanine or even L-dopa, all right? L-dopa is actually just going to increase dopamine immediately because it's the precursor to dopamine, and so is L-theanine. L-theanine is a precursor to dopamine, so you take it, dopamine's going to rise without effort, but if you correlate that with doing work and you only take it while you're doing work, then that's going to associate in your brain, oh, I took this, I feel good, got work done, therefore work equals feel good. Also something, nicotine, more for degenerates, I wouldn't recommend, but nicotine does increase dopamine a ton. So if you're going to focus and you need to lock in, maybe do that. Up to you. Same thing with music. Music increases dopamine. You do that while you're working, you put some good music on in the background, then you're going to feel better and you're going to have that sustained dopamine peak and you're going to be able to work more efficiently. The next thing is the reward, all right? So if you have a reward for actually doing the work, that's going to encourage you to do the work. And also thinking about the reward while doing the work is going to lead to that dopamine peak because like we talked about, reward prediction increases dopamine. So when you're thinking about that while you're doing the work, you're locked in and you're like, all right, if I just send 5 more emails, if I respond to 5 more customers, find 10 more products, then I'll give myself a gummy bear or something that you enjoy, then that's going to make you a lot more motivated to actually do the work. Same thing goes with friends. Maybe you tell yourself, oh, if I get this work done, I can go hang out with my friends, have fun. But the problem is if you start rewarding yourself without actually getting the work done. You need to save these rewards for when you actually get the work done, because if you're rewarding yourself for doing nothing, then that's just going to fuck up your dopamine overall. Now, one thing we need to consider with rewards is reward prediction error. So, this basically states that if you're anticipating a reward and you're thinking about that reward prediction, then the reward doesn't actually happen. We go back up to this graph. What that's going to do, here's the thinking about the reward. You're getting that dopamine, and then you realize, oh, I'm not getting the reward, and it plummets. That's reward prediction. And then you have a massive time where you're just sad because the reward you thought you were going to get didn't actually come. Now, we can apply this. If you don't actually end up getting the work done and you're still thinking about that reward, then you don't give yourself that reward. That causes reward prediction error, your dopamine crashes, and your brain's going to want to avoid that in the future. So you're going to be more likely to get that work done in the future. And really, what this all comes down to is just being able to control your own mind. In summary, you have to be in control of your dopamine. Famous quote is, you have to master your mind before you can master anything else in life, all right? You really have to be able to control your own thoughts before you're able to get shit done, all right? And if you can't control watching TikTok and watching Instagram, then how are you going to be able to get anything done in life? Because hard work isn't hard when your brain actually craves that work. Stop chasing this cheap dopamine, this easy to achieve dopamine. We need to stop wasting our focus and motivation, wasting the amount of dopamine that we have on TikTok and other bullshit. And once we correlate hard work with pleasure and nothing else, you don't correlate pleasure with anything except hard work, you're just going to crave that hard work and you're going to be able to get it done so much easier. When we're talking about dopamine, massive guy in the subject is Andrew Huberman. You need to go check out his podcast. They teach you everything you need to know. And he said, if you can learn to enjoy the pain of effort, you can rewire your brain for greatness. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll see y'all in the next one.